Seguindo o prateado Nilo desde o Cairo, no Planalto de Giza, à sombra das pirâmides, encontra-se uma das autênticas maravilhas do mundo. Durante quase 5.000 anos, a sua existência tem estado envolta em mistérios, controvérsias e incertezas. Há quanto tempo ali se encontra? Quem a construiu e quando? Por que razão foi construída? Quem é que representa? Há câmaras secretas por baixo? Estas perguntas têm, durante séculos, confundido reis, exploradores e especialistas. Mas depois de tantas teorias, escavações e disputas, seremos capazes, por fim, de resolver os mistérios da Esfinge? Os Mistérios da Esfinge. Julho de 1798, Napoleão invade o Egito. A Batalha das Pirâmides ecoou durante horas no meio de uma tempestade de pó, com temperaturas de quase 50 graus. Pouco depois de lograr uma das suas maiores vitórias, Napoleão encontrou-se com algo inesperado, um objeto muito curioso que poucos europeus haviam visto até então. O conquistador, de 29 anos, ficou impressionado com essa cabeça colossal que surgia da areia. O que era? O que representava? Tinha de saber mais sobre esta maltratada criação e sobre a cultura que a construíra.
Napoleon came with a whole team, not only a military expedition, which was the main purpose of his visit, but he came with a whole team of surveyors, engineers, scholars, and artists.
And for the next 3 years or so, they proceeded to record what they saw. In fact, in virtually record time, they documented a great number of the monuments of Egypt, including the Sphinx. In fact, there's a wonderful drawing that shows people on the head of the Sphinx with a plumb line measuring it.
Muitos túmulos e monumentos examinados pelos especialistas de Napoleão tinham inscrições numa escrita que podia ser a mais antiga do mundo, a escrita hieroglífica. Depois do fim da antiga civilização egípcia, no ano 30 a.C., o significado dos hieróglifos converteu-se num mistério total durante cerca de 1.800 anos. Em 1799, perto de uma cidade chamada Roseta, um oficial do Corpo de Engenheiros de Napoleão deparou-se com uma estela de granito. A pedra continha a mesma mensagem, inscrita em 3 línguas distintas. Uma vez traduzida na sua totalidade, a pedra de Roseta viria a ser a chave para decifrar os segredos do Antigo Egito. Quando os franceses foram expulsos do Egito pelos britânicos em 1801, levaram consigo incalculáveis tesouros, mas sem saberem mais nada sobre a Esfinge. Passariam outros 18 anos até que essa estranha e maltratada cabeça revelasse alguns dos seus segredos. Toda a gente conhece a palavra Esfinge, mas, porém, poucos conhecem a sua real origem e o seu significado.
The word Sphinx is a Greek word. They had a verb, sphingein, which means to constrict, to tighten, to strangle, to throttle. And that's related, of course, to their own mythology of their own Sphinx figure. She was a throttler.
It's a mispronunciation of an Egyptian word. Of 2 Egyptian words, living image. Sphinx means Shesepan. It's an Egyptian word, Shesepan, living image.
Because, of course, that is what these sphinxes were. They were living images. Most of the sphinxes are living images of particular kings. The great sphinx is a living image of a divine king, maybe of the sun god, in an incarnation of a living king of Egypt.
A primeira escavação moderna da Esfinge foi levada a cabo em 1816 por um comerciante feito explorador chamado Giovanni Caviglia.
Caviglia came in a time he can do anything. He could excavate and drill in any place. No one will stop him.
Caviglia ouvira rumores locais e lendas sobre a existência de câmaras secretas e de tesouros escondidos e procurou um caminho para entrar na Esfinge. Removeu a areia desde o pescoço até à base e ficou surpreendido ao descobrir que a cabeça estava unida a um enorme corpo de leão de 72 metros de comprimento por 20 metros de altura. Entre as patas encontrou os restos de uma pequena capela e um altar que mostrava sinais de fogo. Talvez a esfinge fosse um templo e um altar que se usara para queimar ofrendas. Sem ceder no seu empenho, Caviglia continuou escavando, apesar do perigo constante de ficar coberto pela areia.
Caviglia came and he had a theory in his mind. The theory, he thought there is a passage, a tunnel from the paw of the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. This was his theory. He was really one of the new ages of thinking about this big tunnel. He excavated everywhere. He found nothing.
No entanto, Caviglia efetuou uma descoberta importante, a Estela do Sonho, um bloco de pedra erigido que contém hieróglifos. A pedra de Roseta permitiu decifrar a sua interessante inscrição, que remontava ao século XIV a.C. e que contava as façanhas de um príncipe real que se tornaria o faraó Tutmés IV.
And he indicates that he slept in the shadow of the Sphinx's head and that the Sphinx was buried up to its neck in sand. The Sphinx came to him in a dream.
The Sphinx took to him in dream and said, "My son Thutmose, I'm dying. The sand is killing me. If you remove the sand away, I will make you the king of Upper and Lower Egypt." And we found there is something politics in this story, because he killed his elder brother, who was supposed to be the king of Egypt. And therefore he was telling everyone that they should forget the crime that he did, because the God, it chose him to be the king of Egypt.
Well, I would view it as propaganda. You know, whether it happened or not, how can you tell, 3,000 years later or something? It's a bit difficult to say. But it is certainly also to say that the god decided that this young prince would become king. So it's a way of legitimizing him.
The guy was so thrilled. He's a nobleman, he's had money. He got some troops, cleaned up the sand, fixed it up, and he became pharaoh. So the Sphinx, when the Sphinx speaks, it really speaks.
A Estela do Sonho continha algo que parecia ser uma referência parcial a um rei que reinara cerca de 1000 anos antes, chamado Rafré, que construiu a segunda pirâmide de Giza. Parece que Tutmés relacionava Rafré com a Esfinge, mas a inscrição está erodida e as suas intenções não são claras. A Estela do Sonho transformou-se na base de todas as controvérsias posteriores sobre a idade da Esfinge. Tutmés foi o primeiro faraó a limpar a areia da Esfinge, mas não foi o último.
The sand that is brought in by the wind, that comes in actually from north of the Giza Plateau and veers by this rock and goes towards the west, finds a hole in the ground that has no purpose as far as nature is concerned. It fills it. So every time the Sphinx is left on its own, that moat is filled with sand. And that happened repeatedly.
Durante o século XIX, empreenderam-se numerosas escavações em redor da Esfinge. Mas os exploradores e arqueólogos, frustrados pela enorme quantidade de areia que era preciso retirar, deixaram a maior parte da Esfinge enterrada e preferiram trabalhar somente em algumas zonas concretas do monumento. Entre os muitos mistérios da Esfinge, apareceram vários objetos estranhos em ambos os lados do monumento.
So in 1853, Marriott was the first to excavate down along the sides of the Sphinx body, and he immediately found these two large boxes on the south side. On the north side, he found 3 boxes attached to the Sphinx, made out of stone blocks. Now there are only 2, so there are 4 boxes still attached to the Sphinx. And in all the history of Egyptology, it's rather remarkable that nobody really said, why are there big boxes attached to the Sphinx? There's some evidence that these were plinths or bases for large statues that flanked the Sphinx body. And it also lends support to the idea that the Sphinx became a popular place of pilgrimage, that the key got turned on the turnkey operation, so that there was not only the Sphinx, but a statue at the chest, possibly divine or royal statues against the sides of the Sphinx, plaques laid into mud brick walls, multicolored. So it was a very rich image in the New Kingdom. And that is possibly an explanation for the boxes. Now, the only box where that doesn't work is the one on the northwest corner. The top of the box doesn't look like it could have received a statue the way the other boxes do. And so that's still somewhat of a surprise, somewhat of an unknown Jack in the Box.
Mariette também descobriu o Templo do Val, mesmo a sudeste da Esfinge. A sua magnífica arquitetura estivera mais de 2000 anos soterrada sob toneladas de areia. No seu interior, Mariette encontrou estátuas deterioradas do faraó Rafre. Chegou à conclusão de que o Templo do Val formava parte do complexo funerário deste grande faraó e que se ligava à sua pirâmide através de uma calçada. A proximidade do templo em relação à Esfinge sugeriu aos cientistas da época que talvez a Esfinge tivesse sido construída por Rafre. Com a invenção da película, a Esfinge converteu-se no tema favorito dos fotógrafos. Esta foto, feita por Maxime Duchamp em 1849, foi a primeira que se fez ao monumento. Depois disso, fizeram-se muitos milhares mais. As primeiras imagens animadas da Esfinge, que poucas vezes se vêem, foram rodadas em 1902 pelos pioneiros franceses do cinema, os irmãos Lumière. Em geral, a Esfinge era considerada uma curiosidade e uma ocasião para tirar fotografias, não um objeto de estudo científico sério. Até 1922, ano em que uma surpreendente descoberta levou a obsessão internacional pelas antiguidades egípcias a níveis nunca atingidos.
An English archaeological expedition headed by a man named Howard Carter sought to uncover the tomb of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, King Tutankhamun. The world had been given a glimpse of its earliest civilization. The tomb's priceless objects added their story to the jigsaw puzzle of antiquity's mysteries.
O interesse pelos mistérios da Esfinge também se revitalizou. Em 1925, o engenheiro Émile Barrese supervisionou a primeira operação de limpeza da areia do monumento. Também empreendeu uma série de reparações muito controversas.
Barrese started this excavation for the Egyptian Antiquities Service, and he did also the restoration of the Nemes cloth of the Sphinx, a restoration which would be today very dubious.
There was a serious thought that a bad desert storm might bring the head off, and concrete was fitted under the head in a sort of vague approximation of what the original wig would have looked like coming down to the shoulders. Not a very good approximation. Completely altered the look of the thing. I mean, you look at it now, you look at modern pictures of it, your own modern filming of it, and then you look at these 19th century photographs. It's almost a different thing. Its character was changed terrifically by those restorations, which I believe, and some Egyptologists believe, should now be removed. We should get it back to looking like it did throughout most of its history.
Uma das imagens mais raras da Esfinge foi captada durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial. Pela primeira vez, uma equipa de homens cobriu a Esfinge com areia, formando uma barba de sacos de areia para proteger os monumentos das bombas nazis. Desde que Napoleão pôs os seus olhos na Esfinge, a civilização moderna tem lutado para descobrir os seus mistérios. Não se encontrou nenhuma história escrita deste monumento. Não parece que se haja registado nenhum detalhe da sua criação, nem em pedra, nem em papiro. Quem a construiu e quando? Para que fim? A resposta a essas perguntas só será revelada se avançarmos até ao passado. A Grande Esfinge é uma enorme escultura feita em pedra calcária. Situa-se num recinto semelhante a um fosso, de onde os especialistas acreditam se retiraram as pedras para construir as pirâmides e os templos das cercanias. Se isso for correto, então a Esfinge terá sido esculpida entre 2520 e 2494 a.C. O monumento é uma brilhante criação da cultura mais sofisticada da Terra. Mas como chegou essa cultura a ser tão avançada? É outro dos mistérios que rodeiam a Esfinge.
It was fashionable at one point to say Egyptian culture sprang from nowhere, or there was a foreign invasion that brought new ideas to Egypt. Some very interesting, fairly recent work in pre-dynastic and earlier cultures in Egypt has shown obviously that that's not the case.
If we go back just before 5,000 years, just before the initiation of Egyptian civilization, the whole scene would be drastically different. In the land west of the Nile, from 5,000 years ago to 11,000 years ago, there were numerous lakes, there was a savanna-like environment, there was vegetation, there were animals and man.
It was a very rich environment. There were fish in the river to be fished. There were game that were attracted to the waters of the Nile.
They really had developed a very advanced river technology that does not translate into civilization. Therefore, something must have happened 5,000 years ago to ignite civilization.
Uma grande seca atingiu a zona ocidental do Egito no 4º milénio antes de Cristo. Os lagos secaram, os rios desapareceram e deixou de haver erva para os animais. Durante séculos, esta zona foi habitada pelos povos do deserto, hordas de beduínos que viajavam por todo o país. Para salvar as suas vidas e as dos seus animais, os habitantes do deserto emigraram até à única fonte de água que conheciam, o Nilo.
They had desert wisdom. They knew how to deal with a dry environment. They knew how to deal with rocks. So you have this whole bunch of people that had desert wisdom mixed with very sedentary people that had river technology. And I believe it was really this incredible, interesting mix between the two cultures and the cross-fertilization of ideas that ignited Egyptian civilization.
This is when we begin to see evidence of more complex societies. Burials become more complex about the middle of the 4th millennium BC, and at the end of the 4th millennium BC, there were certainly rulers over large territories, and finally a king that emerged.
O Alto e o Baixo Egito foram unificados pelo rei Menes, cerca de 3000 a.C. Sob o seu mandato, o Egito desenvolveu-se social e politicamente a um ritmo incrível. 500 anos mais tarde, sob o reinado de Rufu, já os egípcios haviam desenvolvido a ciência e a técnica suficientes para encetarem um projeto extraordinário, como construir uma das 7 maravilhas do mundo.
This was a time of experimentation, a time of bombacity. The culture had found itself and was expressing itself in huge megalithic projects, foremost the pyramids.
If we leave it up to Hollywood, we think that the pyramids were built by a tyrant who enslaved his people and had them cut the rocks under the threat of the whip.
There were surely no slaves connected with the building. We know, on the contrary, we know that this was a very specialized force we would call it pioneer force.
The plain fact is that here was Egypt with a large and highly organized workforce, organized in the first place for agricultural reasons. It was just as well to find something for them to do in the slacker period of the year. You know, political stability probably depended on it.
If I am king, I would say, okay, we collect taxes from these people all through the year. I'm going to get them to work on a project during this dead month.
I don't think it was an administrative project in the sense of, you know, a WPA project or a wage labor project like the Hoover Dam. I think it was more a turning out of the natural communities of the Nile Valley. They didn't have a choice, but it was considered the obligatory thing to do for the father who ruled you all, which was the Pharaoh, to contribute to these massive projects here at Giza.
And therefore, in creating the Great Pyramid, Khufu may have also built Egypt as one unbroken nation.
Khufu levou 23 anos a construir a Grande Pirâmide. Alguns especialistas sugerem que durante esse tempo também construiu a Esfinge. Mas foi realmente Khufu ou algum dos seus sucessores. Durante a 4ª dinastia, reinaram 4 reis: Khufu, Dedefre, Rafre e Menkaure. Qual destes faraós emprestou a sua cara à Esfinge?
Most people believe that Khafre, the king who built the second pyramid, also carved the Sphinx.
The Sphinx is carved from a rock within the quarries of Khufu.
Do I think it's possible that Khufu made the Sphinx? It's possible, but I think it has a lower probability than that Khafre made the Sphinx.
Now we are completely convinced that this is Khufu who has built it, because when you see it in the evening, the light on the face, you see this is the face of Khufu.
The Egyptians will never write a paper and say the Sphinx built by Khafra and give you a proof that's really built by Khafra. They will never do that. But we, as archaeologists, working in the field, excavating for the last 30 years around the pyramids, we write in books and articles the proof that the Sphinx is dated to Dynasty 4.
One day, I hope, when there are further examinations around the Sphinx, one would discover something like a foundation deposit or offerings given to the Sphinx with the name of the one who has carved the Sphinx.
No entanto, os egiptólogos sentem-se mais inseguros quando tentam determinar qual era o seu propósito original, o que se tem revelado ao mesmo tempo mais tentador e mais difícil do que agarrar uma brisa do deserto. O que era a Esfinge? Uma representação do Deus Sol? Um objeto de culto? A poderosa guardiã da necrópole de Giza? À falta de textos do Império Antigo, não podemos estar certos de qual era a sua intenção original. No entanto, temos uma pista importante. A Esfinge de Giza está orientada para este, para o sol nascente.
A sphinx is the statue of a divinity, and a divinity related to the sun god. Sphinxes are related to the sun god.
When the king died, he became the sun god. Therefore, I believe that Khufu is the first king in ancient Egypt that he made a religious revolution. Khufu was the first king in ancient Egypt to say in his lifetime, I'm the sun god. I am Ra.
Khufu was the culmination of the royal divinity.
And therefore, I believe that the only one who followed him is his son, Khafra, the builder of the second pyramid at Giza. Then Khafra actually made this statue for himself, to worship with his two paws his father.
Muitos egiptólogos acreditam que a Esfinge foi designada para realizar uma função específica no complexo de Giza. Mas estaria planificada a sua inclusão desde o princípio? Ou é possível que houvesse algo na zona mais antiga do que as pirâmides? Mais antigo do que o próprio Egito? Algo que inspirou a criação da Grande Esfinge? Quando os reis da quarta dinastia chegaram a Giza, cerca de 2500 a.C., encontraram uma zona escarpada de pedra calcária na zona este. Foi daí que os trabalhadores retiraram os blocos de pedra calcária para construir as novas edificações, deixando à sua passagem uma zona afundada com um enorme bloco de pedra por cortar no centro. Muitos especialistas consideram que a Esfinge se iniciou a partir desse bloco residual. A forma da rocha existente sugeria monumentais possibilidades.
In the desert west of the Nile, there are many of these wind-scarved features, which we call in geology yardangs, from a Turkic word meaning steep bank. One of them, near the Farafra oasis in Egypt, was a dead ringer to the Sphinx. When I saw this one and photographed it, I knew that I am ready now to speak my theory and write it up. And the theory is that in the eastern part of the Giza Plateau, there are all kinds of hillocks that have been shaped first by water erosion, then by wind erosion. And the water erosion makes gullies and makes these hillocks stick out from the ground. Then the wind comes to reshape these. The ancient Egyptians could have torn this apart while they were building the pyramid, but they didn't, because they saw beauty in that shape. a clump and an aerodynamic back to it. And they decided, my God, this we can modify it a little bit to make it like the shapes in the desert that we've seen.
They just embellished it, let's put it this way. They just shaped what was already there into what they wanted.
Perante a falta de provas definitivas, é possível que nunca saibamos exatamente como surgiu a ideia da Esfinge. O que sabemos com segurança é que o monumento está muito erudido e que se degrada, o corpo mais do que a cabeça. Têm sido avançadas muitas explicações para isso, mas é possível que a verdadeira esteja na própria rocha.
The Sphinx was quarried right out of the living rock. Like Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, actually, although there it's at the top of a big mountain in granite. Here it's limestone.
The Sphinx is carved of different members of limestone, different layers of limestone, and some of those limestone layers weather much better than others.
It's also clear that they knew the layering in the rock already, and they knew that the head layer, I believe, was a very good building stone. And that's why you see detail on the head so well preserved. We call it member 3. You see the eyebrows and the eyes and sculpture that's original, I believe, to the 4th dynasty. And then you have member 2, which is the body ravaged by weathering. It's a series of layers that go hard, soft, but in general the layers of the body are quite soft and they flake. The bottom layer, member 1, is a good crystalline hard limestone, rather brittle, because 50 million years ago it was a coral and then a shoal reef underneath this seafloor.
E a partir das camadas de pedra calcária, formaram uma criatura impressionante, diferente de todas as outras, metade homem, metade leão. Os antigos egípcios sentiam-se fascinados com a ideia de misturar as espécies, e isso refletia-se nas suas obras de arte.
The Egyptians were fond of making their own combinations of things. They identified the salient aspects of different things, animals, humans, whatever, and combined them in different and unique ways, identifying animals for their power, like the lion and the bull, for example, and combining them with, or some of their elements with humans, so that that power would rub off on the human, specifically the king, of course.
In ancient Egypt, the king always wants to show his power. He wants to defeat his enemies. And as always, you can look throughout the Egyptian history, that the king always hit his enemies with his feet in the shape of a lion, because the lion body is a shape of power.
And it was that all-powerful element, that fearsome aspect, that the Egyptians deified and combined with their monarch.
You know, in Arabic, the Sphinx is called Abul Hawl, meaning father of terror. Father, not in the sense of his fathering terror, but in Arabic, when you say Abul Hawl, that is to say that he is impressing. He conveys terror.
Hoje em dia, a Esfinge está mutilada e erodida. Ninguém sabe como era exatamente quando foi construída. Mas os especialistas deduzem que o tocado da cabeça era completo, com as suas abas laterais curvando-se sobre os ombros e a fronte adornada com uma serpente em posição de ataque, uma divindade que protegia quem a ostentava. O rosto estava adornado com uma barba divina, comprida e inclinada, símbolo do Rei Deus. Como toque final, pode acontecer que o criador da Esfinge tenha acrescentado algo de surpreendente à rocha viva.
Based on my studies of the Sphinx, it looks like it has been painted, maybe more than once at various times.
The Sphinx was a sculpture, and Egyptian stone sculpture, particularly sculpture made out of soft stone, was always painted.
The skin, the face would have mostly been in red. Elements like the beard, the eyebrows, would have been in blue.
There were traces of red paint along his eyes and eyebrows, cosmetic lines beautifully outlining the eyes and continuing up to the temples.
And the yellow probably could very well have been the bands on the headdress, so that you had blue, yellow, like the lapis lazuli and the gold in Tutankhamun's golden mask.
A Esfinge começou a deteriorar-se praticamente quando os trabalhadores a acabaram. Foram feitos pelo menos 3 importantes restauros durante os 1000 anos seguintes. A aparência da Esfinge ainda mudou mais quando a barba e a serpente ereta caíram seguramente durante o Império Novo, entre 1550 e 1070 a.C. Foram descobertos fragmentos de ambos os elementos muitos séculos depois e, atualmente, esses fragmentos podem ser vistos no Museu Egípcio do Cairo e no Museu Britânico em Londres. Durante quase 5.000 anos, a Esfinge tem estado colocada no alto do Planalto de Giza como testemunho da habilidade dos que a construíram. O surpreendente é que, apesar de todo o esforço e de todas as atenções que se dedicaram ao monumento, provavelmente nunca foi terminado.
There's a shelf at the rump of the Sphinx unfinished. This is a common Egyptian thing. The lower chamber in the Great Pyramid is unfinished. The vast complex of King Djoser at Saqqara, that's unfinished. I think this was part of that rolling project thing, you know, of public works. You laboured during a king's lifetime on monuments associated with him. When he died, his successor did a hasty sort of tidy-up job, brought that to a conclusion and said, move the workforce, we'll start on the next part of this ever-ongoing project.
Well, it could be that the Sphinx and its temple never got cranked up with a living cult during the time that the Sphinx was made. From hundreds, if not thousands of tombs at Giza, we have whole lists of titles, including priests and priestesses of the gods and goddesses of the time. There's nothing we can recognize as referring to the Sphinx. Now that may ring bells for the New Agers, but you see, for Egyptologists, it fits with the evidence that the temple never was completed, and so it didn't have an active priesthood.
De todos os rumores e especulações que rodeiam a Esfinge, a mais famosa é a do nariz, ou melhor, a da sua falta. Quem foi que deixou a Esfinge sem nariz? Quando é que isso ocorreu? Como ocorreu? Ainda hoje o público em geral continua responsabilizando o homem errado. Atualmente, se vemos a Esfinge, impressiona-nos a expressividade dos seus olhos e o seu suave e inescrutável sorriso. A pedra calcária desgastou-se de uma forma tão estranha que, se nos deslocarmos apenas uns metros de um lado para o outro, toda a sua aparência e expressão mudam. Mas como a imagem da Esfinge é todo um símbolo, à primeira vista, não se dá conta de que lhe falta o nariz.
If you will stand in that place where you see the tourist for 1 hour, you will hear at least 10 stories. Everyone has an opinion.
Now this is the Sphinx, the guardian of the sacred enclosure of the second pyramid.
And how did the nose get broken?
When Napoleon came to Egypt, his artillerymen used it as a target and blowed the nose off with a cannonball.
Oh, Napoleon?
But I don't think that Napoleon Bonaparte, the man that took with him all kinds of scientists, he took them right along with the officers and soldiers. I don't think they will go around an archaeological feature like that and begin to shoot at it with cannons.
Some people will say the barbarians came here and they did knock and cut the Sphinx nose. Others will say no. The Arabs, when they came here, they came right away and they damaged the Sphinx nose.
If you look at the face carefully, there's a deep wedge mark right down the top of the nose here, right at the bridge. And there's another deep groove right on the Sphinx's actually left side. And for all the world, it looks to me as though somebody took 2 big wedges and pounded them in there, and then the nose looks like it was purposefully broken off all at once.
A chap named Abdel Latif visited the Sphinx he was a doctor from Baghdad. He was there in about 1200 AD, and he was bowled over by the Sphinx's face. It was in good form when he was there.
In the 14th century AD, it's written by the Arab historian called El-Makrizi. He wrote that there was a religious man, a Sufi, and he came here. He found that the people who lives around still look at the Sphinx with sacred and divine. He did not like this as a Sufi, and he came with a metal and he damaged the Sphinx nose to show the people that this is a stone and not a god.
Working here at the Sphinx, I thought it would have been a marvelous discovery to find a big hole in the floor and there would be the nose. But that didn't happen, of course, and nobody knows where the nose really went.
O Império Antigo terminou cerca de 2150 a.C. e o Planalto de Giza ficou praticamente abandonado. Pouco a pouco, tudo o que se sabia sobre este monumento, como o seu corpo, o motivo da sua construção e o nome do seu criador, perdeu-se nas areias do tempo. Os árabes conquistaram o Egito no ano 640 d.C. e redescobriram o interesse na riqueza perdida dos faraós. Circulavam disparatadas histórias sobre câmaras secretas sob a Esfinge. Os aventureiros árabes não encontraram nada, mas os seus esforços inspiraram as gerações futuras de caçadores de tesouros, arqueólogos e escritores esotéricos.
People who think that there are holes under the Sphinx and treasures under the Sphinx, or not necessarily gold, but important text, papyrus, etc. But a lot of investigation has been done and nothing was really found.
When I began to be interested on the Sphinx, mystery and magic, I was really looking for secret tunnels in the Sphinx. And I was the one who really wanted to find that out if the New Age are true or we are true as scholars. And this is why I and Mark Cleaner did clear 3 tunnels.
O primeiro túnel está situado entre as patas, atrás da estela do sonho, e penetra apenas uns 5 metros no interior da Esfinge. O segundo está situado no alto da Esfinge, atrás da cabeça, e é muito provável que tenha sido escavado pelos primeiros caçadores de tesouros. Mas o maior de todos os túneis situa-se na parte traseira da Esfinge.
We knew about this tunnel from this old man, Sheikh Mohammed, who was working for us. And he said that his grandfather told him, if you remove that stone, you'll find a tunnel inside the Sphinx. But he warned us and he said that everyone who tried to remove this stone, there is always a curse happen to him. And I told him, don't really worry about this curse. And we came and we opened these tunnels and we entered inside. But before I and Mark Cleaner entered inside, we sent an American friend of us to take the curse first. And we found the tunnel goes for about 45 feet inside the Sphinx body. We found nothing except an old shoes. But what's important that we found out that the tunnels was cut in the Sphinx was not new tunnels. The method of cutting and how it was cut, it proved to us that this is an ancient tunnels and not modern tunnels. How? Because people from the late period are very interested in the Sphinx, like we do today. Then all of them, they think there is something underneath the Sphinx, there is tunnels, there is secret rooms, and that's why they come and they dig.
When we did the seismic analysis around the Sphinx, we not only looked at subsurface weathering, but we looked for other features also. There's a void or cavity or chamber. There's something down there.
The Stanford Research Institute in 1977, and they came and they did make drilling. They went down more than 60 feet in the right paw of the Sphinx, and they found nothing. They found that the Sphinx is a solid rock or a living rock, and there is nothing underneath the Sphinx.
No entanto, a lenda subsiste. Todos os anos se apresentam novos pedidos de grupos esotéricos, de instituições académicas que querem usar as últimas tecnologias para encontrar túneis ou câmaras escondidas. Parece que há um mistério da Esfinge que para alguns nunca morrerá. No início dos anos 90 do século XX, uma nova expedição da Esfinge desafiou todas as cronologias aceites sobre a história do Egito. Abriu-se um aceso debate entre os especialistas.
My work on redating the Sphinx has, in fact, been somewhat controversial, to say the least. One thing that I was struck by is that there are apparently different types of weathering on the Sphinx, in the Sphinx enclosure, and elsewhere on the Giza Plateau. What I'm convinced is that on the body of the Sphinx and in the Sphinx enclosure, which was constructed at the same time as the Sphinx, you find weathering that was clearly the result of rainfall. I feel very confidently that the Sphinx is, yes, older than 2500 BC, older than dynastic times. Then the big question is, how much older?
And that observation is based on the fact that there is more evidence of water erosion on the Sphinx, particularly the upper body, than anywhere. And that is true. There is more water erosion because that part of the body of the Sphinx was exposed to the elements from way before the ancient Egyptians ever existed. Before ancient Egypt, before the change of climate, but for hundreds of thousands of years.
These softer layers are more clay-like, and they are so soft, in fact, and this is true of the Sphinx itself before it was covered with restoration, they're so soft that you can literally just crumble the stone with your hands because it's so clay-like. That's what's causing these rounded recesses, not rainwater washing over the side of the Sphinx. On the harder layers, which are kind of belly and rounded like, you have this flaking that's so severe you can take huge chips the size of giant potato chips, sometimes almost a centimeter in thickness, and it's the salts probably that are pushing these flakes off and crumbling as we speak. You don't need thousands of years of rainwater to make this weathering pattern. It's happening right now in front of our eyes.
I can't argue scientifically about the weathering patterns or anything like that, but I can tell you that there was nothing in Egyptian civilization that we know of that would be able to create a monument like that early on. It would simply be in a vacuum, and that makes no sense.
A teoria da erosão pela água continua a ser muito controversa. A grande maioria dos especialistas acredita que não há provas ou que há muito poucas provas que a sustentem. Se a Esfinge não surgiu das brumas da pré-história, quem a talhou e quando? Escavações recentes no Planalto de Giza desterraram novas provas, muito importantes para apurar sobre os verdadeiros construtores da Esfinge. A pouca distância da Esfinge, em direção a sul, Mark Lenner e Zahi Hawass realizaram uma descoberta extraordinária que tem ajudado a resolver outro dos seus mistérios.
This is where we found evidence of the workman camp. And I believe the workmen who worked in the construction of the Sphinx and the pyramids lived actually above this area. They lived in the camp here. They eat their beer and bread, and they take their tools, and they go underneath that bridge, that door, to work from the sunrise to the sunset.
Our excavations that we're doing now, where we're finding a vast production complex the size of several football fields for turning out bread and meat. We have scores of bakeries. We have collected more than 80,000 pottery shards.
In this area we discovered the mastaba grave. And this skull looks like maybe belong to a young man because his forehead looks small. And the doctors who checked the skeleton said that most of them died when they were young, between 35 and 45, like this.
All the skeleton of men and women that we found in the lower cemetery, they have a stress on their back because they were involved in moving heavy stuff. The discovery of the tombs of the pyramid builders also tell us two important things. Number one, that the builder of the pyramids were Egyptians. And number two, that the builder of the pyramids and the Sphinx were not slaves.
We have names, family relationships. There's a whole context to the Sphinx and pyramids. It is this very human context that I find missing in the New Age literature. If it wasn't these people, who was it? Where is the evidence? Because you can't make human culture disappear without a trace, leaving only an enigmatic monument standing like some kind of an iceberg floating alone.
Há 5.000 anos que a Esfinge ocupa uma posição destacada no Planalto de Giza. Viu e suportou muitas coisas. Mas apesar da sua extensa, mágica e misteriosa vida, nada fazia pensar que este monumento renasceria de uma forma tão esplendorosa.
It was at 1:30 in the afternoon, February 1988. A chunk from the Sphinx right shoulder fell down.
And the whole country was in uproar. How could this happen to the Sphinx?
And I went to buy cucumbers from a man in the streets of Cairo. And the man recognized me, a poor man who doesn't know how to read and write. When he recognized my face, he said, "Sir, how is the Sphinx?" That is the most impressive and wonderful word or a sentence I ever heard in my life.
The media, the television shows, the talk shows, radio, everybody in Egypt was in an uproar. How could this happen to the Sphinx? Let us fix it. Let us have this happen never again.
And this is why we decided to start a very important campaign to restore this statue in a scientific way. And not only we have to decide the method of restoration, but we have to take the opinion of everyone, because the Sphinx do not belong to Egypt only, it belongs to everyone all over the world.
A partir de 1990, a Esfinge foi submetida ao restauro mais ambicioso e completo que jamais se realizara. 3.000 dias e 12.478 pedras mais tarde, em janeiro de 1998, desvendou-se ao mundo a Esfinge, conservada e restaurada.
When I took the scuffling away from the Sphinx and we began to make the celebration, I looked at the Sphinx. I saw the Sphinx was smiling. It was maybe the best night for the Sphinx. For the 5,000 years history, he saw everything. He saw Napoleon, he saw people come from everywhere, he saw New Age people, he saw people talking about him, but he never had a good time like that night, that everyone was looking at his face.
In modern-day Egypt, the Sphinx plays a very significant role. I don't really fully understand it, but it's a very significant role.
Definitely one of the marvels of the world, to everybody, and it's the pride of the Egyptians.
For us, it represents the glory of Egyptian civilization, the things that the Egyptians were capable of.
So we're very concerned that something happens to it, because it's not only to the Egyptians, it's the whole world.
The Egyptians of today kind of put the Sphinx on par with the pyramids, if not a little higher.
And I would wonder if some of the people who live by the Sphinx don't still, in some way, in a very benevolent way, still consider it a god.
Descobrir-nos-á o símbolo mais emblemático do Egito, todos os seus segredos?
I don't expect that we're ever going to know everything. I think there's always mysteries. There are always theories that may replace other theories.
If we do know too much, we shall lose our interest. I think it's better not to know too much. We know enough.
I think, like so many modern scientists and scholars, we have to be comfortable with a level of probability rather than certitude, rather than certainty. As a matter of fact, I think if we had to be certain, we'd rebel against it.
I like to say about the Sphinx that this is a monument with a very long and colourful history, most of which we don't know.
I could say to people that the stone can talk to me. He's a stone, but he's not a stone. He's a stone in the eyes of everyone. But I feel that inside the Sphinx, he's looking at us, keeping the secrets of our past. He's really telling us that we should learn from these secrets to understand our future.